Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking part in this presentation, this session on helping tell the stories of US World War II fallen. We're happy to have you here. We have our speaker here, Don Milne, who will share some thoughts with us today. What we would ask is that you please keep your mics on mute throughout the presentation, just so that we can hear what Don has to say today clearly. And if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the chat here on the call. And then at the end, we'll reserve some time for Don to answer any of the questions that you might have. So Don, the time is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. I'd like to thank Roots Tech and FamilySearch for making it possible for me to share this, what I think is an audacious project with many people that I think would be super interested in learning more and maybe helping to participate in telling the stories of all 421,000 US World War II fallen. So I'm Don Milne. I'm the founder and director of Stories Behind the Stars, a nonprofit initiative. And the way we got our name was, many of people that may or may not be familiar with what are called service flags. When someone has a family member in the military in the United States, they're given a service flag with a blue star. And if unfortunately that person dies in the line of duty, a gold star is superimposed over that. So that's where we get the idea of a star. It also happens to be the motif that's used at the National World War II Memorial. The main thing that people go when they visit there is the Price of Freedom Wall. There's 4,048 gold stars, each one representing 100 of the World War II fallen. So at this point, they're just stars, right? There's not actually a story there for each of them. And the purpose of our initiative is we want to help tell the story of these unremembered heroes of World War II. Now, these individuals were first remembered by their buddies and comrades when they died in Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, in the United States. There were a lot of people died in training accidents. They were remembered by who we consider to be the greatest generation. And many of them remembered him for decades. I heard a story from one individual. He had a flag that he put up in his yard, and every morning he would go out, raise his flag, and remember his friends that didn't come home. President Eisenhower, after he was no longer president, 20 years after Normandy, 20 years after D-Day, returned and did a documentary with Walter Cronkite that was aired on CBS in 1964. And you can watch that on YouTube. It's a really neat documentary. And you'd think, well, how are they going to end the documentary? Are they going to talk about the parades? Are they going to talk about monuments? No, it was President Eisenhower and Walter Cronkite walking through the cemetery there in Normandy and reading names off of the grave sites, which was basically what you could do in 1964, but it's not 1964 anymore, it's 2022. And so the mission of our nonprofit initiative is to tell the stories of every one of the 421,000 US World War II fallen. And the way we're doing that is we've created a website, we've created a database on Fold3. It's a property of Ancestry where we're housing all of these stories. In previous generations, maybe people would put together stories and they'd put them in a book, and it would be at a Veterans of Foreign Wars post, or it might go in a library, a local library. And maybe a generation ago, someone might set up a website by a county, or maybe a school would do a project, but they were all scattered in different locations. But now it's possible, where we're at with the internet today, that we can do all of these in one centralized database. But the whole idea is we just don't want to have a database where people can go online and search for them. Let's bring those stories to the locations where we remember these people the most, which is their grave sites or memorials. So Find a Grave, another Ancestry property, has a website. Find a Grave has a smart app that will allow you to read these stories at grave sites and cemeteries. This roll of honor that you see on the right, that's put together by another one of our partners, Together We Serve. They also have a smart app that makes it available for you to read stories at grave sites or memorials. These are some of the organizations that support our project. It's a volunteer nonprofit initiative, as I pointed out up front, but we wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for the help of these many organizations. Ancestry and its sister organizations, Newspaper and Fold3, they have a lot of great content. You're here at Roots Tech, so you know a lot about a lot of the information you can find there that'll help you research family members. But there's a lot of military records that you can find, or period newspaper stories, and they've given us institutional access so that even if you don't have a membership, you can go through Stories Behind the Stars, get access to this research material for free. My Heritage is another one of our great supporters, another organization you'll see a lot here at Roots Tech, and they're our largest financial donor, so we appreciate them. Together We Serve helps us a lot with saving stories of the fallen. The Friends of the National World War II Memorial, they helped us get on the national stage, so we're pretty well known for what we do in our field. Better Causes Foundation is our fiscal sponsor, and so forth. So really grateful for these organizations that support our mission. It really just started out as a one-man blog back in 2016. My kids are older and I'm a terrible golfer. I was looking for a new hobby, and I thought, I got this membership to Ancestry and I'm interested in military. I think I'll just start writing on my lunch break a story about one of the persons who would have been 100 years old if they would have lasted that long, but they happened to die during the war. So it was the anniversary of their birth date. I would write their story. And my plan was I was just going to do this for the 75th anniversary, starting from Pearl Harbor through the end of the war, which the 75th anniversary was just in 2020. And then I'd be done. And I ended up, my blog had like more than 1 million people reading it by the time I'd been doing this for a year and a half, and had other people decide, well, can I help start writing stories too? So by the time I was getting close to wrapping up, there was almost 24 of us writing stories for this blog. But the whole plan was to end it at that point, because even though I had written 1,200 plus stories by that point, it would be impossible to do 421,000 stories doing one a day. But we just decided kind of organically that if we stop doing a blog and turn this into a nonprofit initiative and find a partner like Fold3, where all the stories are saved, then we could actually get this done. So now it involves more than 1,500 people from all 50 states, more than a dozen other countries. We've been in the news more than 100 times, local stories, national stories, stories about our volunteers, stories about the people that we write about. It's something that attracts the attention of people because people love their World War II heroes, and they love to know that they're going to be remembered forever because of the efforts of what our volunteers are doing as writers. We have had, at this point, thousands of stories completed. After 2 years, you've only been doing this for 2 years. Our first project was to write the stories of all the 2,100 stories of all the fallen from one state, which happens to be Utah. So we did that as a pilot project. And if you were to go to this page on our website, you can read some of the highlights. You can click here, read more stories. Here we have a list of all the volunteers that helped us on the Utah project. When we finished Utah, we went and did all the stories of all the Americans who died on D-Day, June 6, 1944. And we have some sample stories here that we put up front. And then if you click on here, you can read the story of everyone who died on D-Day. This project was coordinated by a couple of volunteer directors, and then we had more than 100 people that helped us with that project. And after that, last year, we decided let's do all the stories of everyone who died at Pearl Harbor. There was 2,335. So we have a story about every one of them. If you were to go to USS Arizona and find a name, you could actually read a story about who that person was. And we had 4 people mainly helping us directing those efforts. And again, more than 100 volunteers that helped make that possible. Right now, we're approaching 15,000 stories. If you go to Fold3 and type in the search button, Stories Behind the Stars, you'll get to our partners page where it shows right now we have over 14,000 records. You can type in a name or a state or maybe a military unit or a cemetery. You would find that those 14,000 stories that we've already written. Today it's 14,364, but it goes up every day. So we've done quite a bit here in 2 years, but we have a lot to go still. We want to give a story for every one of the stars, every one of the fallen from World War II. I'm just going to give a few examples of some of the people that deserve to have stories. This is Lieutenant Faith McGinnis. He died at age 25 in September of 1942. Even though he's a black man in the 40s, he was attending college. He was a football player. He left college early so he could volunteer to be a pilot in the Tuskegee Air Force that it's well known today. Some of you may know a couple of months ago, there was a famous Tuskegee Airman, Charles McGee, Brigadier General Charles McGee just died a couple of years ago. He was presented with a presidential medal, I believe. He probably knew Faith McGinnis or knew about him. But if you were to want to know more about Faith McGinnis before our project, you probably have to visit 2 or 3 different websites to get the information, and there wouldn't just be in one location. This is Private Joseph Fitt. He died at age 22 on June 13th, 1944. He was part of the 82nd Airborne, dropped behind enemy lines on D-Day. And the whole purpose of dropping the airborne divisions behind the beachheads was to stop German tanks from getting to the beachheads and stopping the invasion. And in 1944, you couldn't drop a tank out of a plane. So you weren't stopping tanks with tanks, you were stopping German tanks with infantry. And Private Fitt just happened to be one of the men who stopped a German tank by himself with a grenade. And he only lived 1 more week. He was killed by a sniper 1 week later. And his story would not be easy to find before our project. One more, last I wanted to share, Private First Class Fred Yamamoto. He died at age 26, also in 1944. He volunteered, he was from California, and then his family was sent to Wyoming in an internment camp, but that didn't turn off his patriotism about serving his country, and he ended up volunteering for the 442nd Combat Regimental Team, went to Italy and then to France. He was instrumental in those people that know World War II often hear about the Lost Battalion and how the 442nd Combat Regiment Team was able to get through to them when other efforts before theirs was not possible. He died during that attack and was awarded the Silver Star. But before our project, it wouldn't have been easy to find information about him in just one location. And it's possible because you have volunteers that do these stories. They come in all ages, all backgrounds. I think the youngest I know of is 11 years old. We have many in their 80s, 75% of them are 55 and older, almost half are retired. So they have more time to do this, but we do have younger ones. We have people that do this as school projects under the directions of teachers. Have a lot of people in the military or veterans or family of veterans, people who are descendants of people who served in World War II or died in World War II, all background and all ages, all 50 states, more than a dozen other countries. It's only because of people like this, and maybe you want to become one like that, that we're able to do this project. So here's Private Joseph Fitt, and I'm just going to pull up the story that was written here. And it's not very long. It's basically just an obituary. Put our sources here at the bottom if people want to find out more. But now someone can go to Joseph Fitt's cemetery and they say, oh, that's Joseph Fitt. I wonder if he has a story. They can pull out either their Together We Serve smartphone app or their Find a Grave smartphone app. They can read a story about Joseph Fitt. And that story was written by Randy Hervey from Colorado. Faith McGinnis' story was written by Linda Simpson from Oklahoma. Fred Yamamoto was written by Max Collar of North Carolina. None of these people are related to these people, but they volunteered for this project because they thought this is important. It's a once in a lifetime project, but it's something that should be done. And they volunteered to help out. I'm so thankful for these individuals and the hundreds of others that are helping us so far. So in order to get to the remaining 407,000 stories, I've done the math. I'm going to need a lot, like 2,000 people writing an average of 1 story a week. If we do that, we can get every one of them done in 41 months. And that's kind of an odd number. Why 41 months? Well, in 41 months, that'll be September of 2025. It'll be the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And there will still be a few World War II veterans alive at that time. Fewer than now. There's probably less than 200,000. And when you're 95, 100 years old, you're not going to live many more years past that generally. But we would like to be able to let them know, those that are still here with us at the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, that all of their buddies, all of the 421,000 who died during World War II are never going to be forgotten, because each of them have a story that is in one common database that people can read at any memorial or gravesite. The way we're able to do this is we have training material. So if you don't feel, I don't know where to look, I don't know how to find the information, we have a free, what we call boot camp. We call it STAR Course Boot Camp. STAR stands for storytellers and researchers. And we've just created material with lessons on how to find a name, where to find the material, what to include in a story, how to write a story, how to save a story. We have some quality review so that you can know your story looks well. This part about a NordVPN is if you don't have access to ancestry sites, we have a VPN that lets us get you institutional access through us. We have a Facebook group that you can join that can connect you with about 500 other people on this project to kind of share questions. And together we serve. One of our partners has some training videos. So everything you need to know to write obituary length stories, we can get you in our boot camp. And we also have a YouTube channel that you can visit with dozens of videos. I would say probably half the people in that 1,500 people that are participating, they're actually interested in just maybe doing stories about their own family members, which is fine because they're going to know that family member the most. So these apply even if you don't want to join this project. This video here, are you related to World War II hero? You can watch that and you can find out by using FamilyShare if you're related to somebody who served in World War II. So we have these YouTube videos that should be very helpful for people. With the training material we provide, we're going to point you in the direction of many of these websites that some of you that do genealogy maybe already use: Ancestry, Billion Graves, MyHeritage, but some of these are more specific with content related to World War II. And we're grateful for the individuals and organizations that set these up because they really are helpful for getting us to have the content we need to write our stories. We also have a podcast that you're welcome to subscribe to. Our podcast has been going on for about a year, and we have come out about weekly. We interview people that are actually our researchers and writers, and they tell us about their experiences of writing stories and also share some of the stories about the people that they research. So that's pretty fun to be a part of. Our current project right now, I mentioned we already did everyone from D-Day, everyone from Pearl Harbor, everyone from one state. So our next big project is we're doing all the names of everybody from Arlington National Cemetery who died during World War II. And it shows that we have approximately 7,700 names. It's kind of interesting. We don't actually know the number of World War II fallen in Arlington. We got a list from Arlington National Cemetery, but it only includes everybody buried there between 1941 and 1945. Their records aren't good enough to tell us if they served in World War II. So our volunteers are actually going through that database right now, bleeding out the ones that are not from World War II. And then we have right now about 100 volunteers that are actively writing stories. We want to have these done by Memorial Day of 2022. And if we have about 300 people helping us, we think that can happen. And that means from this point forward, going to Arlington National Cemetery and going up to a gravesite like Leo L. Beals from Ohio, you won't just be looking at a gravesite and wondering, oh, wonder what his story is, because you'll pull out your smartphone and you'll read his story. And then you'll go to the grave next to it and read his and read his. As long as they served in World War II and died during the war, they'll have a story, which will be an entirely new experience, at least right now in Arlington, but eventually anywhere in the world. We have right now 13 different states where we've had people that have stepped forward as volunteers and said, well, Utah did it. They did all 2,100 people that died from that state. Can I do it? And so they've just stepped forward and volunteered. The ones that you show active there on the map, those are where we have people actively trying to do this. Some states are like Utah had 2,000. Nevada has like 600. I think they have the fewest. Some states had a lot, like New York had like more than 40,000. So this is going to be a huge project in some cases, but others very manageable. We have a real good project right now in Arizona, which also had around 2,000, and they're making good progress there. Another area has making more progress than others is in Alabama. Some of you may be interested in being one of our volunteer leads, and we're not drafting you. You're not forced to stay here forever. But if this is something that you'd like to lead, definitely you want to contact me and say, hey, you don't have any being Nevada. Let me know what's involved. And our state directors meet each month via Zoom, and we kind of talk over how can we increase people participating. The math usually works out that if you have between a dozen and maybe 50 people at the most, if you have that many people writing one story a week, you can actually get a whole state's worth of projects done by September of 2025. So what I'm kind of asking people that are watching this video is, let's do a little less Joe Exotic and a little more G.I. Joe. I know that America's favorite pastime, especially during the pandemic, is I can't go out, I can't do stuff. What's on Netflix? What's on Disney Plus? What's on Hulu? And you'll just spend hours and hours just binge watching stuff. And so I'm asking people to give up 2 hours a week of binge watching, because within 2 hours, maybe 3 hours at most, you can completely research and write an obituary length story about someone who served in World War II. And if we get people to do that, we'll be telling some stories of some real heroes. With the last few years, Marvel heroes have been really big. And spoiler alert, Iron Man died, and people were sad about that. But he was a make-believe hero. He wasn't a real person. We have real heroes that really did die that deserve to be remembered. And so we want to make the stories of all 421,000 of these World War II heroes accessible. So if you go to any gravesite, any memorial, anywhere in the United States, at Normandy, in the Philippines, there's a famous cemetery in Hawaii that has many of these fallen heroes. You'll be able to read their story right from a smartphone. We think this is a great gift to future generations so that they have an experience you would expect to have in 2022. If this is 1922 and you're visiting a cemetery, yeah, that's what you expect. You can look at a gravestone and read it, and that's it. But this is 2022. So we really should be able to bring the experience of visiting cemeteries into the 21st century and make it so a gravestone or memorial isn't just names carved on stone. It's a portal to tell a story about who that person was. Every fallen deserves a story, and I'm hoping that people like you will be interested in learning more about this project and joining us and telling the stories behind the stars. Again, I'd like to thank FamilyShare, RootsTech 2022 for allowing me to make this presentation. And I look forward to answering some of your questions now during the question and answer session of this presentation. Daniel, if you want to go ahead and tell me what questions we have in the chat, and we'll take as much time as we're allowed to do that.
Thank you, Don. Impressive what you showed us here today. I think the overall summary of the chat is that there are a lot of people who want to be involved and who want to volunteer as they watched what you were sharing and shared some of your thoughts and insights as well. I've been trying to compete here with Tatiana on the chat because she's answering a lot of the questions, but let's see if we can find one that that hasn't been answered yet. Some people are asking about those who haven't actually died during the war. Are there any plans to expand that and even expand it beyond the US and have Canadians or those who have fought in that war that weren't US citizens?
Yes, it's totally possible to do that. The smartphone apps that we have with Find a Grave work with any grave that has a Fold 3 memorial. And Fold 3 isn't only just for US World War II fallen, it's from any country. And it doesn't have to be someone who died during World War II. Our focus on Stories Behind the Stars is to just do the 400,000 that are from World War II. It would be super daunting to do, there's 16 million Americans alone who served during World War II. All but 200,000 have already passed on. So there's plenty of great stories that could be told about them. And if you wanted to go on Fold 3 and create a memorial for a loved one who served during the war and has since passed on, that will work with the smartphone app that we have. It's just for our particular focus, we've narrowed it down to the 400,000, but they're all being saved to the same database. You could do something for someone who served in Vietnam or who served in Korea. They'll still work. We're just not tracking those as part of our project. But totally, that's what I like to see. Arlington's has 400,000 graves. When we finish our project, you'll be able to do this project of reading at a gravesite with about 7,000 of them. Well, what about the others? Eventually, I think people will do that. They'll realize, yeah, let's not just make this an experience of looking at a grave and seeing names. Let's add the story and make it available by smartphone. So totally, yeah, we have lots of people that'll do both. They'll do stories about World War II and they'll do family members or others that are from other military service.
Oh, great. Awesome. Yeah, I think that answers a few of the questions that were asked around that that aspect of the topic. One other question that was asked was about those who worked through World War II as well, such as nurses, women that worked, and other aspects of the war that died in the war as a result of that. Is that being included as well in this project, or just?
Yes, the 400,000 number is not just those who died in battle. In fact, the number that died in battle is less than 300,000. There was many that died in accidents. The planes in the 1940s were not necessarily what we see now. There were literally dozens and dozens of planes that went down every day in accidents for 4 years, which is quite shocking that we found out when we did that. And although women didn't serve in combat roles during World War II, often they were nurses close to the front lines. And we actually have a group of people that are working specifically on women's names. And no one's ever put together a complete list of how many women died during World War II while serving in the military. We think it's between 600 and 700, but we're actually working on those. We've done podcasts with our lead person that's doing that. She's been interviewed for a number of news articles. You can join her efforts and focus on women's names. I think they've just gotten over like 100 of those so far. And we think there's about 700 of the women's stories that need to be told. And there's some wonderful stories that deserve to get greater attention. It's actually Women's History Month this month. So we're hoping to get it more attention in the media about what we're doing about the women's names.
That's great. That's awesome. So there's a more technical question here. Are people required to have an Ancestry or Fold3 subscription to read or participate in the project?
You don't need any subscriptions at all to read. If you want to participate in the research, it really does help to have an Ancestry subscription. And if you have one already, that's great. But if you don't, because one of our partners is Ancestry, they've made Stories Behind the Stars a virtual library, so to speak. So if you go to a library, sometimes you can look up stuff that's usually behind the firewall. Like you can go to a library and look up New York Times articles, right? Normally you have to have a subscription. So they made us a virtual library, and through a VPN system that we have set up, you tell us, I want to volunteer. I need to have access to newspapers.com so I can see period newspapers and see if I can find stories about this person. We'll get you set up with a VPN login, and then you can use our library version of newspapers. So it's not quite as user-friendly as having your own. So it's kind of like taking the bus instead of having your own car, but it still gets the job done. And it does save you a few $100s a year if you don't plan to already have an Ancestry account. So yeah, we have the ability for people that want to help to get access to the research site without having to pay money apart from volunteering their time.
Right, makes sense. Great. So one more question here is regarding one of our participants that lives near a veteran cemetery in Massachusetts. It's always hard to pronounce that. What is the fastest way to check names against what has already been done?
Well, if you go to that website that I shared a little bit earlier, let's see if I can find if you go to Fold3 and go to Stories Behind the Stars in the browser, if the search button, just type in Stories Behind the Stars, you'll get to our partner page. And if you were to type in someone's name, that's where you'd find out if we already have a story for that person. 14,000 stories out of 421,000. Do the math, we're like at 3%. So chances are we haven't yet, but that's how you could find out. There's a lot of people that have content on Fold3, but they don't have a story. They might have a record like enlistment record, or maybe a application for gravestone record might be on there, but that's not a story. We need people to write stories to go along with that content.
Right, makes sense. So what if in searching these records, you find errors in one of the stories, for instance? How are people supposed to deal with that kind of situation?
If you're doing it through fold through, if you're doing it through fold 3, if you look up a story down at the bottom, it's going to tell you the person who wrote that story. Right here, Bob Joyce wrote that story. You click that, this opens up a window. You can send them a message if you find something that you have more information or you need to add something. You can do it that way. Our other partner where we're creating stories is a website called Together We Serve. On that website, we're able to do editing functions, so we can actually go in and edit stories. If we find someone typed in 1954 instead of 1945, they just did a typo, we can go in and fix stuff like that because we have editing rights. And every story that's saved on the Together We Serve platform is automatically transferred to fold 3. So it's a little more complicated to learn how to use Together We Serve, but I would guess at least half or more of our researchers do the Together We Serve version because it has a lot more bells and whistles. And so if you take the time to learn how to use it, you usually say, wow, I'm glad I took the time to learn how to use Together We Serve, because the story still gets saved to fold 3, but I have so much more capabilities by doing it that way.
This is great, Don. It's really important, and I think everybody here agrees, to record these stories before we lose them for forever. So it's great, this preservation project that you guys are involved in, and there's so many people here saying that they want to take part in it and volunteer as well. So not all the questions were answered in this presentation. We didn't have enough time to go through everyone's questions, but I will share this chat script with Don, and he'll be able to go through each of your comments and questions. And if you have any other questions, Don also shared the email address for that you can use for asking questions or more information about the project.
Daniel, do I understand that the chat feature will be open for people that are watching the recording so that they can also add questions later?
Yeah, so on rootstack.org, on our session page, you can join the chat. There's a button at the bottom where you can actually join a chat that will be open throughout Rootstack, that you can communicate with Don through there as well. And you can help each other as well on this topic. So this is also being recorded. We will upload it soon after this session is completed. And so you can rewatch this, any information that you want to make sure you review again. We welcome you to do that soon after. So thank you, Don, for the time that you took to prepare this, and also for everything that you're doing with this project, and for sharing all of these thoughts and ideas with us. Here it is, the email address as well. Take a note of that and reach out to Don if you need anything or if you have any questions, okay? Thank you everyone for your time. We hope you continue to enjoy Rootstack throughout the day. Make sure to check out the other classes that we have and other live sessions that are coming up.